We're now going to talk about something called the specific notification pattern. And I'll start by explaining what the pattern is, and you'll see in a second why we're covering this. Here's the context. A family of threads, or pool of threads in Java, that coordinate to synchronize their interactions using shared resources in a certain way, often use things like, say, monitor objects. And they can coordinate in various ways, LIFO, FIFO, priority, and so on. So that's kind of what we want to be able to do. We want to coordinate threads in some specific way. The problem is that the built-in monitor objects give the apps no control over the order in which threads acquire a resource. So there's no way of being able to say, you're going to acquire the resource in LIFO order, you're going to acquire the resource in FIFO order, you're going to acquire the resource in priority order. It's what's called haphazard notification. It's whatever the system chooses. And it's often the thread that's run most recently, just to keep things fresh. And in particular, if one thread calls notify, then it's just sort of randomly selected which thread, not randomly, it's actually defined by the operating system, but you don't have any control over it. It's haphazard. So both of these things, selection of a thread, scheduling of threads, these are all up for grabs. There's no control over it that you have. What can you do to solve this? You can apply something called the specific notification pattern. And you can read about this pattern in this paper, which you can get from my website. I recommend reading the whole paper. It's not very long. And focus particularly on listing 3. That's the one that's most relevant for our purposes. So what specific notification does, the intent of this pattern is to provide a non-haphazard mechanism for selecting and scheduling the order in which threads run when they're notified. And in particular, you can specify specifically which thread in a family of threads should proceed after notify or notify all is called. You can get control over that in a way that you can't get by using the built-in monitor object semantics because they are haphazard. So here at a high level is the way this pattern works. You can either use monitor objects or you can use reentrant lock and condition objects. They both work in much the same way. So what you do is you have threads go to sleep by making wait calls or await calls if you're using reentrant lock and condition object in the monitor objects. So you can end up with sort of a queue of these things. And you want to have one monitor object for each thread that must be individually notified. So that's the trick to this thing. You're going to keep track of all the waiting threads and give them each their own monitor object. And then you're going to queue them up in whatever order you care about, be it LIFO order or FIFO order or whatnot. In our case, it's going to be obviously FIFO order because that's fair. And the thread that's waiting on its monitor object is notified in a specific order. So the monitor object mechanism, when someone notifies it, it goes ahead and will release things in the appropriate order. Again, FIFO, LIFO, priority. And I'll walk through this in more detail in a second. But that's the basic idea. You end up with a queue or a list of threads, a queue or a list of wait objects like monitor objects or reentrant lock condition objects and so on. And you queue them up in some order and you release them in the appropriate order based on whatever is important to you. Okay, so that's a quick summary of the specific notification pattern.